Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Minnesota Matters. I'm Tess Rice. I'm MBA's General Counsel. I'm joined by Teresa Kubas. There she is right there, MBA Senior Government Relations Manager. She's going to talk today about the primary results and also the upcoming elections. And then Tom Boswell-Healy, Associate Counsel and Compliance Consultant, is here, and we're going to discuss conservatorships. Before we get started, though, I want to give a couple plugs. One, we have our regulator forum. It's on Zoom. It is on October 7th at 9 a.m. We'll have the FDIC, the OCC, and the state and the Federal Reserve represented, and we've put together a good agenda. There is a compliance portion to it. Seems shorter than in previous years than the rest of the agenda, but it should be very interesting. I hope you can join us for that. And then the Advanced Compliance Workshop is on October 28th and 29th in Mankato. Tom and I will both be there. Some of the topics that are going to be discussed are compliance and AI, fair lending, Reg E, the Minnesota hemp laws, new exam process. So there'll be a lot covered there in the two-day webinar, or it's not webinar, it's in person. It's at a hotel in Mankato. So I hope you can join us for that. Okay, I want to turn it over to Teresa to talk about the primaries.
Sounds great. Good morning, everybody. Not sure if you're all already campaign and electioned out for 2026. It has already been a very busy year here in Minnesota and around the country. So I kind of just want to touch base a little bit kind of on what the primary results, what they were, and then what they mean, and kind of looking ahead to 2027. If we kind of go back to, I think probably, we look back to the beginning of the year when we all believed that Governor Walz was going to be running for a third term. And then that quickly changed after, a lot of the fraud, the state fraud became much more national news. And that resulted, with Walz really stepping down and kind of making the way for Senator Klobuchar to decide to run for that seat. But I think, again, I think a lot transpired at the beginning of the year that really kind of shaped what the rest of the year looked like in Minnesota between the fraud and then President Trump sending in ICE and the Metro Surge and kind of the impacts of that on the state. Regardless of what side you're on, it definitely has impacts on the election. And I think it's just kind of how that, what the top of the ticket looks like. So it's just kind of touch base on the governor's race. Senator Klobuchar had a very easy endorsement back in May, and so she easily got endorsed for the DFL. The Republicans, obviously, it was much significantly different. Kendall Qualls got the endorsement back in May at the convention. There were some technical difficulties up in Duluth that they gave Speaker Lisa Damuth, an out from abiding by the endorsement so that she did run to the general. And Mike Lindell had already said that he was going to run for the primary, but he kind of tossed his weight behind Kendall Qualls at that endorsing convention. So you had a three-way race. You had, and again, just a little history. Nobody in Republican-wise, it's very rare that the party goes against the endorsed candidate, which hasn't always benefited Republicans. Democrats have not felt that same tie. If you go back to Governor Dayton, Governor Walz, neither of them were endorsed their first time. They both took it to the primary. So there has precedence on their side of the aisle, but not on Republican side of the aisle. So it was, uncharted territory. But, Kendall Qualls had the Republican endorsement and Mike Lindell had the president's endorsement. Mike Lindell, polling wise showed that he was up. But Lisa definitely was kind of working a lot of the get out the vote. So Lisa ended up, Speaker Damuth ended up winning the primary for Republicans. Mike Lindell has not, conceded, is claiming that there are some inaccuracies with the polling and how the polls were so wrong. I think anybody that's been in tune with any elections in the last decade know that polls really don't matter. to a degree. They are kind of a snapshot in time. Again, it all really depends on who responds to polls. I believe I get them quite frequently and I avoid them. Um, so we do have a really strong top of the ticket with Senator Klobuchar and Speaker Dameth being at the top of the ticket for the governor's race. U.S. Senate, also very important. That one, both Republicans and Democrats were very hotly contested. Lieutenant Governor Flanagan running, she quickly got in after Tina Smith dropped out or, decided that she wasn't going to run in 2025. So Flanagan really got in, and then Angie Craig a couple months later. Angie Craig, the sitting congressional member from the second congressional district, kind of came in more as a moderate, thought that would really benefit her. Peggy Flanagan, much more of the progressive wing. And that, again, if you looked at the polls showed them significantly closer in the end. Peggy ended up winning by almost 20 points, which was really shocking in that race. On the Republican side, you had a three-way race again with Adam Schwartzy, who got the endorsement, and then Royce White, who was the candidate up against Amy Klobuchar 2 years ago, and then Michelle Tafoya. Michelle Tafoya being more of the outsider to politics, very well polished speaker, and she didn't even go for the endorsement. And so she ended up winning significantly. Like that one was handily won by her. So it's a really, it's four women at the top of the ticket between Amy Klobuchar and Peggy Flanagan, and then Lisa Dameth and Michelle Tafoya. So I think it makes for a very strong top of the ticket. Minnesota is very much of a split ballot voting. So people definitely kind of go back and forth and they jump back and forth. So that's kind of, we're definitely very interested in kind of what happens with those ones. I think a lot of people have been talking, but that, Amy is difficult to beat and that, that's kind of already out there that she's going to win. Amy is, Senator Klobuchar is really good at winning elections. She has proven that she is, really good at winning elections, and she's really good at raising money. So she definitely has money and that on her side. And then I think just, and I can see Tess popping on and she wants to probably talk a little bit about the polls, but just one other race that's a really interesting one to watch, is the AG's race. If you go back 4 years ago, Ellison had a very tight race 4 years ago against Jim Schultz. And Jim was a great candidate, decided that he is not running this year. He heads up the Private Business Council and does great work for them. But, Ellison is on the ballot once again this year, and Ron Schutz is the attorney AG candidate that's running against him. Very quiet. I think he'll definitely need some work to kind of get out there and get his name out there. But Ellison, while his name's out there, probably doesn't necessarily have the most popularity. Two things really that will hurt Ellison is the fraud in the state, and then also I think more recently the pardon that the governor and AG and Chief Supreme Court Justice pardoned a couple months ago. So I think those two will definitely impact Ellison. And I think just kind of overall, it's always been tough for him. But this year could be one of the more difficult races for him. Tess.
Well, as Teresa said, polls are polls and we can't really rely on them. But I thought it'd be fun just to talk about this KSTP poll that just came out. So right now, the governor's race, Klobuchar is at 52% and Dameth is at 36% with 17% undecided. Klobuchar does much better with younger people and people in the metro area, of course, and Dameth does better outstate. And then in the Senate race, that's a lot closer with Flanagan at 46% and Tafoya at 41% with 11% undecided. So I think on the GOP side, they really believe this is a race that they could win. And then on the AG side, that one was a toss-up. So I think they were both at 48%, which was a little bit of a shock for people, I think. 15% were still undecided of that, including 25% of moderates undecided. So very interesting. That obviously is a very vulnerable spot for the DFL right now.
Well, and
And
interesting
with
though, also kind of as the polls, one of the two closest statewide races, again, Republicans have not won statewide since 2006 when Pawlenty won in the three-way race in 2006. So it's been 20 years since the Republicans have been able to win statewide. But the two closest races, 4 years ago were the auditor's race and the AG's race. And actually the auditor's race being even closer than the AG's race. And I think the KSTP poll definitely shows that Scott Jensen and I think it's Nate Flipovich, they're neck and neck. But I think again, it's nobody knows what an auditor does. And Jensen, in that regard, will have better name recognition from running for governor 4 years ago. So people might look at those and they may see a D or an R, but I think the name recognition definitely helps Jensen in that one.
Yeah, interesting. And as Teresa said, I mean, who are the people that participate in polls and how
Yeah.
reliable are these? I don't know. I mean, I think it's
And
going to
again,
be a pretty exciting season.
we're still so far out, and obviously, the ads are going to really start kicking up. Early voting starts at the end of September, so you can pretty much vote at the end of September and get it out of the way. Or you can wait all the way till November 3rd. But I think just, interesting things to think about. It's been 8 years since we've had a new administration in there. So we've already seen that Commerce Commissioner Grace Arnold has resigned. So there will definitely be a new Commerce Commissioner. I believe, obviously if Speaker Dameth were to win, we'd have all new commissioners. I think even if Senator Klobuchar wins, if Senator Klobuchar wins, she will also have the ability to appoint her replacement. So that's obviously getting a lot of attention right now as to who would she replace herself with. But also, she would, there's a likelihood that she would end up replacing most of the commissioners. A couple of them might withstand the exchange. But new administration, what's that administration going to look like? Senator Klobuchar and Speaker Dameth have come out with platforms and kind of what their thoughts are, looking to 2027. But then legislatively, these are the ones that we really watch closely. 2 years ago, Republicans were able to get some of those seats back in the House. Senate wasn't up for re-election 2 years ago, so there were no flips in the Senate. So the Senate is still is currently 34-33, DFL majority. The House, as you know, is 67-67 tie. So those are the races that we kind of really look at. You go back 4 years ago, there was a complete one-party Democrat control. I think a lot of people, a lot of businesses really do worry about a possible one-party control again going forward, just because we saw a lot of the mandates, the employment mandates that came through, 4 years ago with that election. And, we've had conversations with a lot of the caucuses, and they're aware that businesses are concerned with one-party control. We definitely do enjoy divided government. It's not pretty. The end is never easy, but there is the need for compromise, and nobody's going to like that compromise, and that's not a bad thing. And so we look at the fact that the last 2 years have been 67-67, just having a tie in the House has been great, has been that ability to kind of pause and really think things through and kind of know that you have to have compromise and there had to be a vote on the other side. I don't just, it won't be a tie next time around. It won't be 67-67. The likelihood is it will probably flip back to the Democrats. There's fewer seats for Republicans to pick up. More that were closer for the Democrats to pick up. And again, if you're looking at a midterm election, the president is really unpopular. And so that doesn't tide well for Republican. So I think you will probably end up seeing a Democrat House going into 2027. The Senate is 34-33. That is where Republicans really do hold a chance of taking the majority. Because if you look at the handful of seats that they really do need to focus on, there's a couple in the metro that they really need to hold. Um, there's 40 some retirements or people that are not running for their current office. But you have to hold those few. There's the Chaska Chanhassen area, Maple Grove, over to kind of the Stillwater area. Those are the ones that the Republicans really do need to hold, and Anoka has another one as well. But then there's a handful outside, up in Detroit Lakes, greater Minnesota, up the Duluth area, not Duluth, but Duluth area. And then um, over in St. Cloud, there's a great candidate up in St. Cloud. So there's 4 or 5 that if you look at the House and if you look at the House A and B district, they're Republican. It was just really not a great candidate 4 years ago that had some not well vetted candidates. And so those are some that you can definitely pick up. But you've definitely seen those candidates that voted for a lot, those Democrat candidates that voted during the one party control for, tax increases and mandates, definitely swinging back around the last 2 years to try and, change kind of the tone of their campaign and kind of what their thoughts are. So we'll see kind of how that pans out. But I think, if you look at what's really on the ballot this year, if it depends on who you talk to, what issues are resonating. Is it the economy, inflation, fraud? The Republicans will definitely hit on, one party really did, they blew through an $18 billion surplus. That'll be a conversation, which is where the spending is going, the amount of fraud that came out of that. But then you have the Democrats that are really going to look at Metro, ICE and Metro Surge and kind of really hit on that and inflation, and the tariffs. So messaging will be everything. I apologize now. It will all be negative campaigning because that to this day is what works. It's less, it's very infrequent that we see positive ads out there. So, as we've said, polling is not reliable. So take it with a grain of salt. The election is November 3rd. But if we look towards, next session, we will have all 3 commerce chairs. And, the next Minnesota Matters will be in November right after the election. So we can kind of get more into this. But all 3 of our commerce chairs in the House and the Senate have retired, are not there. And so that will be where we will focus a lot. It'll be probably, some new leadership, but it's a budget year. And so we'll get to know every new legislator. It'll be enjoyable. They'll all have their banking stories that we will really reach out to you all as well to find out who those contacts are that you have, because you are the best lobbyists for the MBA. We can do all the work at the Capitol, but having you guys have those connections and those relationships is incredibly important to the work that we do in St. Paul. So session starts on January 12th, and we'll slowly roll to the November 3rd election date. So that is what I have.
Thank you, Teresa. That was great. Now we're going to talk about conservatorships, and this is kind of top of mind for Tom and I. A judge from Hennepin County Courts reached out to the MBA asking to talk about conservatorships. And it turned out that his issue is that banks are not honoring conservatorship papers. So I did have a discussion with him about that and was able to narrow that problem down, not to banks, but to 2 large banks and some credit unions. So it wasn't a community bank issue. But he may do some sort of webinar for us in the future. But the courts are concerned, at least in Hennepin County, about banks not honoring those documents when conservators walk in with it. So knowing that, Tom's put together some materials, just some background on conservatorships. If you have any questions that you want to pose, please put them in the chat. Tom?
Yes, and I was going to post in the chat here, send it to everyone, so that's good. But this is a link to Minnesota courts. They have a document on conservatorships and guardianships. So it can be quite helpful to get some background information if anybody's interested in that. The PDF is in the chat link. Um, but yes, going back, so the conservatorships, guardianships, both of them, they're established by the court order. So you need to get uh, that court order. Uh, and part of the issues with that is the court orders can vary. They can have, place really kind of any limitations they want on the particular conservatorship or guardianship and how that's going to play out with the interaction with the bank. So it's good to get that information and understand what any limitations may be if there's certain ones on there. Um, and let's see, one thing I wanted to talk about too is just kind of the difference between the conservatorship and the guardianship itself. So the guardianship is really just aimed at being a kind of control over the person, the physical person, um, and make decisions about their body and the mind and things like that. Whereas the conservatorship is more of a financial relationship. So they're trying to have mechanisms where a person can act on behalf of the person who's subject to the conservatorship in relation to their financial interests, whether it's real property or their bank account or what have you. So if you're presented with just guardianship papers, we have some information in the deposit manual about that. That's just kind of an industry best practice guideline about if they expect only about $5,000 really on an annual basis to run through the account, then you can set up a bank account with the guardian. Otherwise, there really should have a conservator appointed if they want to have a bank account form relationship like that, and that would require the court to appoint. Otherwise, the court may appoint a guardian just to care for the person and then rely on other non kind of court relationships to manage the person's finances, whether it's a joint account or you can have a power of attorney. Um, that's one important thing. I think we get that question a couple times, can you have a power of attorney when there's a guardianship? And yep, you can. One doesn't, you know, uh, make the other one moot or anything like that unnecessarily. Um,
But
unless
what if they're
there's,
fighting, Tom? What if
yeah,
the power of attorney and the attorney in fact and the guardian or the conservator are fighting? Then
yeah,
what? Who
that's
wins?
that's a problem.
The
I mean, I
conservator
think,
wins.
yeah, if it's a conservator, the conservator would win on that. Yes, if
Yeah,
there's a guardian, they don't have control over the finances, so
yeah.
they know. But they can always go if there's a problem. You can go. Other parties can petition the court for clarifications or get somebody removed or what have you. But it's a formal process, so you gotta do that.
Can the conservator though just revoke the power of attorney?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure on that. I haven't looked at that one. You have that?
Okay, I
Does that
say
come
that they
up?
can.
You said they can. All right. So there you
I think
go.
they can. Yeah,
You can.
yeah. So they really are in the power position, but it may serve their interest to let those power of attorney relationships continue to exist. But if there's some kind of conflict, then they can end that relationship.
Right. You certainly have certain situations where maybe the attorney in fact is local and the conservator is not local, so it's easier to maintain them to do those sorts of activities. So that's good. Let's see. Another thing that comes up with some frequency is if you have co-conservatives or co-guardians and whether or not they have to act in concert. I think the usual tack is that they have to act together unless the court order says otherwise. So the court order can adjust that and say anybody can act individually. Um, but I think typically if it's silent, you treat it as they have to act together, which can be a problem for banks, obviously, if you have a bank account and you're requiring both signatures, on a check or something like that, or if you have some other mechanism where they're agreeing that they both agree for something rather than signing on each check, which can't banks usually don't monitor for or account for in the deposit agreement that we're not going to check for that. So that question does come up as well. Another thing that comes up obviously, death or the loss of particular parties. Um, then you got obviously of the person that's subject to the conservatorship or the guardianship. It terminates that official relationship immediately. The guardian or conservator still has to make certain accountings to the court, but as far as the bank is concerned, it ends the relationship. And then we got a
Oh,
question in there.
yeah, yeah. It says if
Uh,
there's not a conservatorship in place, but a guardianship has been granted, can that guardian set up a fiduciary account at a financial institution? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So that's what Tom was talking about before, that it isn't in state law saying, hey, guardians can set up bank accounts. But we did actually turn this over to our outside counsel years ago, just asking, because this came up a lot. Can a guardian have an account? And the opinion was yes, they can because they need to take care of the day-to-day needs of the ward. And so their clothing, their groceries, whatever it might be, and that is hard to do without a bank account. So it was the law firm's opinion that yeah, that is something that a bank could do.
but getting back, so if there's a death, obviously the person that's subject to it, it kind of ends that conservatorship or guardianship, and there has to be accounting to the court back and forth, and to kind of wrap up that formal relationship. If there's a death or if somebody tries to quit, who's the guardian or the conservator, then you need to go back to the court, generally to get somebody appointed to replace them. Uh, and that's again, it's a formal process. You kind of go through the courts for that. So there should be documentation of who the new guardian or conservator is as well.
So if we back up a little, so if someone comes
Yeah.
in with the conservatorship papers or the guardianship papers, so what are you looking for on there, Tom? What's the banker looking for to make sure that this is authorized, what they want to do?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you want to make sure you have the right person first. Get there, make sure the person in front of you is the person that's appointed in the court order. And then, hopefully the court order will go through and lay out what sort of powers they have. Some of the ones that I've seen just generally say they give them all the powers that are in the statute. So that's kind of seems to be the normal rather than
Mhm.
having any sort of limitations, but the court doesn't have the ability to put limitations in there. So if it just references that they have, everything that they can do under the statute, um, then there's less to be concerned with on the limitations. So, but just to make sure you go through it and verify that there's no limitations in there. Some can be limitations of time too. I've seen those kind of emergency conservatorships or guardianships that may be as short as 30 days, which seems, um, not helpful at all, at least for the banks as far as they're concerned. You're going to open an account for 30 days, and then what do you do? And obviously, they usually don't get that information to you uh, super quickly, so they may have 10 days left in their guardianship or conservatorship. So um, that's something really difficult. Again, you concept it. I think the bank would have to do some more work there to monitor and make sure that they get updated a court order to have that continue, or they might just have to essentially freeze the account until they get that information. So.
Yeah. So basically the job of the conservator at first is to collect the assets of the estate, right? They're supposed to possess those, and they do that by, having the accounts renamed in the conservatorship. But when you talk about safe deposit, um, I believe that all powers gives them the ability to go into the safe deposit and empty the box if they want to, because that's their job. They're supposed to go in and get the personal possessions together and get the finances in order.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, you can have limitations on that. I suppose if they don't have a key, to enter the box,
Yeah.
that's
Or
that's a
if it's a
problem too.
joint box, you're obviously going
Joint
to want the
boxes,
other renter there.
right.
That would be real awkward. Can be a difficult situation if the joint renter doesn't agree to it, but they do have the power to go in and do that.
Yeah, and kind of the last little piece I had on is that, since these are court orders, the person who's subject to them can, seek to restore themselves to full, capacity, uh, essentially, so they could have, end the guardianship or conservatorship themselves. Again, that's a formal process with the court. They have to make a petition to the court. The court will set a hearing time, hearing dates, and then, prevent evidence on either side and make a determination on whether or not the person should be restored to their full capacity or not. So that's always possible too. So again, you if a person's subject to a conservatorship or guardianship said, had it ended and restored, they should have the court order finding that and be able to provide that to the bank. So,
One question we get a lot, Tom, is if the conservatee passes away, what is the conservator allowed to do with that account? And the statutes say that their one job is to turn the money over to the estate. So they could write that final check out of the account to an estate account.
yeah, I think so. And they have that duty to account for what the finances have happened during their conservatorship to the court.
Oh,
So
yeah. I have served as a conservator. I did it for my dad in Hennepin County, and it is a big responsibility. There was a lot of paperwork filed and certainly a lot at the end, but I was filing reports. I don't know if it was monthly. It might not have been as often as monthly, but every transaction that was made, every piece of property that was sold, everything had to be accounted for, and then it was reviewed after he passed away. And then it could be ended, right? So it is a serious thing, and other people are watching, not just the bank.
right.
At least in
Right.
Hennepin County, there.
Yes. Yeah. At least in Hennepin County, yeah. Should have that. But yeah, that's good if the conservator is making that payment out to these states so they can direct that to kind of wrap it up. And you still have, banks can do some if they know that there's outstanding checks or something for payments that are made before the death of the individual, you can certainly wait until those payments clear before doing that. So
Yeah, I was just thinking it would be a more awkward situation if there isn't going to be an estate, if the assets aren't more than the small estate threshold and there will be no estate. Um, what do you think about that, Tom? Putting you on the spot there with that one.
yeah, then I think if it's going to be below the dollar amount, going to be a small estate, I think you could then you just wait until you receive that affidavit, whoever's claiming going to claim the funds, and then you can send those out.
And that
And
would be straight
sometimes,
from the
yeah,
conservatorship account.
right. And then depending on the situation too, you might get the medical assistance claim from the county or whatever, and they tend to like to send a letter that, hey, we're gonna file a claim once the 30 days are up, but please don't disperse funds in the meantime. So, because they kind of
Yeah,
have super priority, even if there's, on a
that's an
normal account,
important
even if
one.
there's a POD beneficiary, so they can take in front of them as well.
Right. Yeah. And if you've already paid out the POD beneficiary because you hadn't received that notice yet, that POD beneficiary is going to have to pay the state.
Yeah, they're
So
responsible.
yeah, they're going to be the ones responsible. But once you get that letter, then the bank could get in trouble if they pay
Right.
the beneficiary first. So those are important to make sure that you flag in your system so nobody gets paid. So was
I
that
think
the entirety, Tom, of
that
your
that was it
presentation?
on the conservative guardianships. I did want to
Oh, yeah,
mention
yeah.
the Minnesota fraud geographic targeting order was renewed, you know, Friday afternoon, before its expiry date on Monday. So that goes again through February 6th of 2027. So those banks that are impacted by that here with the presence in Hennepin, Ramsey County will be following their last one, at least under this renewal, by the end of March of 2027. And then again, they're subject to unlimited renewal for 180-day periods. So could be renewed again. Hopefully, we'd know a little bit sooner than like the last business day, but no guarantees on that.
I've heard that's how Treasury operates, so we may expect to see
Yes.
that again.
Yeah,
Have you
that
seen
seems to be
those?
pretty common. Friday afternoon, lots of things
Yeah,
come out Friday afternoon.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Have you seen any other GTOs? They talked about doing them in some other areas, but I haven't seen any in other states.
and not specific with fraud. I mean, there's been a long-standing one related to real estate purchases that's not aimed at banks because it's aimed at non-finance transactions. So it's aimed more at title companies and real estate brokers and things. But that's been out there for quite some time in areas like Miami, New York, San Francisco, places with high property values where they think that people may be buying properties with cash to kind of launder money. So,
Okay. All right, so that is what we have for today. Remember, Tom and I are always available at legal@minbankers.com if you want to send us an email with any questions you have on the legal or compliance side. We'd be happy to answer those for you. Thank you for joining us today. This was probably recorded and will probably be on our YouTube page within a week or so. Thank you for joining us.